She walked into the dealership wearing faded jeans and a simple white t-shirt, where rows of million-dollar cars gleamed under perfectly aligned spotlights. The air smelled of leather and polished metal, but to her it felt oppressively sterile. She approached the reception counter with measured steps and said, "Hi, I wanted to ask about the luxury McLaren parked outside." The senior salesman behind the desk, Blake Thompson, glanced at her white t-shirt, then at her scuffed sneakers. He snorted, partly to himself, partly to his junior colleague. "I think you're in the wrong place, ma'am," he said, his voice laced with condescension. "These cars start at $300,000. This isn't a sightseeing tour." He waved a dismissive hand toward the exit and summoned 2 security guards, without breaking eye contact. A ripple of suppressed laughter ran through the showroom staff. A few nearby customers turned, curious at the disruption. Her face flushed briefly, but she said nothing. Quietly, she pivoted on her heel and walked out of the showroom, her shoulders straight, her expression unreadable. The next morning, Boston's skyline was still gray, with dawn mist when a silvery Rolls-Royce Phantom glided into the dealership's private lot. Early sunlight streamed through the glass walls of Boston Luxury Motors, turning the showroom into a cathedral of opulence. Inside, the same staff who had chuckled the day before froze mid-pour of coffee, murmurs dying on their lips. The rear coach door of the Phantom opened with a soft click. The woman who had been turned away stepped out, wearing the same jeans and crisp white t-shirt, her brown hair pulled back into a neat ponytail. No makeup softened her features. No jewelry distracted from her calm authority. She wasn't there to make a statement. She was the statement. Blake Thompson straightened his navy suit, confusion etched on his face. But before he could greet her, his junior salesman, Daniel, approached with practiced politeness. Clipboard in hand, Daniel said, "Good morning, ma'am." "I'm Daniel. How may I assist you today?" She offered a faint smile and nodded toward the elevated platform. "I'm interested in the midnight blue coupe up there." In that instant, Blake realized he had underestimated her. But Daniel moved smoothly forward, unlocking a new chapter for both of them and for Boston Luxury Motors. Daniel led her across the gleaming floor, each polished tile echoing their footsteps. Blake hovered at the edge of the showroom, arms folded, uncertainty darkening his posture. As they reached the raised platform, the midnight blue McLaren Azure sat like a jewel beneath focused lights. Its paint caught every beam and refracted it into deep cobalt highlights. "This is the limited edition Azure," Daniel explained, voice steady. "Only 15 were made worldwide. Exclusive appointments only." He tapped the touchscreen panel at the platform's base, and the car's display lit up with detailed specifications. She examined the curves, the low, aerodynamic silhouette, the seamlessly integrated vents, the signature dihedral doors. "Tell me about the engine," she said softly. Daniel smiled. V12, twin-turbocharged, 600 horsepower. 0 to 60 in 2.8 seconds. He gestured to the cockpit. "Shall I open the door?" She nodded. Daniel released the latch. The door rose smoothly. Inside, the hand-stitched leather seats gleamed, accented with custom azure stitching matching the exterior. A subtle chrome inlay ran along the dash, and carbon fiber panels framed the center console. She ran her fingers over the leather and leaned forward to study the carbon fiber weave. "It feels as alive as it looks," she whispered. Behind her, staff watched in stunned silence. One technician lowered his coffee mug. Another checked his phone to confirm the car's price. Blake's face went pale when Daniel casually mentioned delivery to a Beacon Hill address. The whispering grew louder as Daniel closed the door and turned to her. "Miss Collins, shall we step outside for a closer inspection of performance features?" He guided her toward the showroom exit. As they moved, 2 security guards who had been stationed nearby straightened their posture. Blake realized they were here for more than a photo op. He swallowed and fell into step at a discreet distance. Outside, the Azure sat on a rotating display pad beneath the open sky. Morning light danced on its surface. Daniel pressed a button on his tablet. The engine roared to life, deep, controlled, purposeful. A gentle vibration hummed through the platform. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the sound settle around her. When she opened them, her calm gaze met Daniel's. Let's discuss delivery details, she said. Inside the showroom, Blake took a breath and picked up his phone. He tapped out a single message to corporate: VIP arrival, immediate priority. And in that moment, he vowed he would never judge by first impressions again. The morning air was cool as Daniel walked Miss Collins around the Azure, pointing out the adaptive suspension and carbon ceramic brakes. His voice was confident, each explanation precise. She listened intently, her eyes tracing the wheel spokes, the engine cover, the aerodynamic vents. The display pad rotated slowly, giving every angle of the coupe its moment in the light. Suddenly, the service bay doors swung open, and a sleek man in a tailored dark gray suit stepped onto the showroom floor. Time seemed to pause. The man's gait was measured and authoritative. Blake, who had been hovering near the entrance, swallowed hard as recognition dawned on him. Julian Collins advanced without hesitation. He stopped a few feet from Daniel and Maggie, offering her a soft kiss on the cheek. "Sorry I'm late," he said, voice rich and calm. "Had to wrap up a call with Geneva?" Maggie smiled, unhurried. "You're just in time." Blake's throat tightened. The room, once filled with murmurs of gossip, fell into reverent silence. Even the security guards stiffened. Daniel cleared his throat, then said, "Mr. Collins, may I show you some optional upgrades?" Julian's gaze shifted to Daniel, appreciative. "Please do." He placed a firm hand on Daniel's shoulder. "Thank you for your professionalism." A ripple of astonishment passed through the staff. Blake's stoic facade cracked when his phone buzzed again. Client flagged VIP, Maggie, Collins and spouse. Realization sank in like ice water. Maggie stepped forward, brushing her palm over the hood. "We'll take delivery at our Beacon Hill residence," she said, tone even. "Please ensure it arrives showroom fresh with 0 miles on the odometer." Daniel nodded, cheeks flushed but steady. "Absolutely, Miss Collins." Julian produced a black folder and handed it to Daniel. Inside was a pre-approved cashier's check for the full amount. Daniel's hand trembled slightly as he accepted it. Maggie added, "And please credit the full commission to Daniel." Behind them, Blake recovered his voice. "Miss Collins, Mr. Collins, I apologize for yesterday's misunderstanding." Maggie lifted her gaze. "What misunderstanding, Mr. Thompson?" Blake hesitated. "I assumed—" Julian interrupted gently. "You judged by clothing instead of character." His words were soft but carried like thunder. Blake's face reddened. He found himself at a loss for reply. Daniel closed the folder and looked around. "Let's finalize the paperwork inside," he said. As the Collinses turned toward the showroom doors, staff bowed their heads in newfound respect. In that moment, the hierarchy within Boston Luxury Motors shifted irrevocably, and at the center of it stood 2 people who had arrived in jeans and a white T-shirt and left a legacy of humility and grace. By late morning, Blake Thompson sat alone in his glass-walled office, phone in hand. The message from corporate had arrived. "Video conference at 2 p.m. Explain." Yesterday's incident. His reflection in the tinted window looked unfamiliar, an emblem of misplaced pride. He pressed join and steeled himself for Eleanor Grant's stern face. Meanwhile, Daniel cleared the Azure's display pad and gathered his notes. He tapped his watch. Time to prepare the customer experience training materials. Today's agenda: presence over presentation. A module Daniel had drafted overnight. He rehearsed aloud in the empty showroom. Voice firm. "We meet every guest with curiosity, not judgment." He paused when security guard James poked his head in. "Heard you might co-lead with Blake," James said quietly. Daniel nodded once. "I'll do my best." At 1:45 p.m., Blake found himself sitting beside Daniel in the conference room. Eleanor's face filled the screen. "Mr. Thompson," she began crisply, "describe the moment you realized your mistake." Blake swallowed and met Daniel's calm gaze. "When he confirmed her identity," Blake admitted. "I judged her by attire, not by her credentials." Eleanor nodded. Then turning to Daniel, she said, "You'll co-lead this initiative, effective immediately." Back in the showroom, Maggie and Julian paused by the service bay doors. A silver Mercedes sedan, dispatched by the Collins Foundation, idled outside. "Before we head to Beacon Hill," Julian said, "let's stop by the Outreach Center." Maggie smiled at the children's drawings taped to the walls. crayon McLarens, scribbled thank you notes, sketches of the azure. She placed a gentle hand on a 9-year-old's shoulder. "Keep dreaming," she whispered. Cameras from local news, outlets recorded the scene, proof that respect had rippled far beyond a dealership. At 3 p.m., Blake and Daniel stood before a small group of sales staff in the showroom. A whiteboard behind them read, "Perception isn't reality." Blake cleared his throat. "Today we begin fresh. We greet every visitor, regardless of attire, with the same, 'Welcome, we'd offer a VIP.'" Daniel stepped forward. "Let's practice." He invited a junior rep to role-play a casual customer. As the rep arrived in a hoodie and jeans, Blake held the door open and offered a genuine smile. The room shifted in that instant, walls of arrogance peeling away. Later, as the sun dipped below Boston's skyline, the Azure stood alone on its rotating pad. Daniel walked past and rested a hand on the car's roof. He thought of Maggie's quiet grace and realized this was more than a sale, it was a lesson. And inside Boston Luxury Motors, that lesson was only beginning to change everything. Weeks passed, and subtle changes took root across Boston Luxury Motors. On a misty Tuesday morning, a young woman in a faded hoodie hesitated at the showroom entrance. Her eyes flicked nervously to the gleaming Lamborghinis and Bentleys. Blake Thompson, now dressed less like a gatekeeper and more like a guide, spotted her and greeted her by name. He had remembered her from a community workshop list. He offered her a bottled water and genuine eye contact. "What brings you in today?" he asked. The woman's shoulders relaxed. "I'm curious about your electric lineup," she said, nodding toward a polished Jaguar I-Pace. Blake smiled and called Daniel, who emerged with a tablet loaded with specs. Together, they walked her through battery range, regenerative braking, and charging options. No assumptions, no judgments. As the woman's confidence grew, she realized she wasn't merely window shopping. She was exploring real possibilities. That afternoon, Maggie Collins and Julian arrived unannounced for a service appointment. They stepped into the expanded outreach center within the dealership, a bright, open space where local students painted murals, celebrating speed and sustainability. Maggie inspected the art and high-fived a teenager, demonstrating a drone prototype, funded by her foundation. Julian chatted with Blake about corporate partnerships, while Daniel exchanged ideas on refining the presence over presentation curriculum. By evening, local news outlets ran features on the dealership's transformation and the Collins Foundation's community impact. Headlines praised the collaboration. Luxury meets empathy, Jeans and Grace, Boston Motors reinvents respect. Staff members felt pride swell as they read the articles together over coffee in the break. Room, no longer wary of whispers, but hopeful about shared purpose. As closing time approached, Blake returned to the showroom floor. He paused by the rotating McLaren Azure, the car that had sparked it all. Soft overhead lights cast deep blue reflections across its curves. Blake placed a hand gently on the hood and whispered, "Thank you." Down the hall, Daniel finalized next week's training session, adding a new exercise, inviting staff to share one judgment they overcame. Outside, the city lights blinked on, and the dealership's glass facade glowed softly against the dusk sky. Inside, a single sentence echoed in every corner. "Respect doesn't cost a thing, but it can change everything." The following morning, Boston Luxury Motors opened under a different rhythm. Velvet ropes lay removed, replaced by open space that welcomed every visitor. A fresh tray of water bottles and snacks greeted guests at the entrance, with a small placard reading, "All guests welcome." Daniel noticed it first and smiled. He was setting up a driving simulator in Bay 3 when Blake walked by, stopping to acknowledge a teenage boy lingering near a Bugatti Chiron. The boy looked hesitant in his worn sneakers. Blake crouched, offering a genuine invitation. "Want to take a virtual spin?" The boy's eyes lit up, and Daniel flipped the simulator on. For 10 minutes, the teen wasn't just imagining the drive, he was immersed in it, heart racing. As Blake stood back, he spotted a familiar figure watching from across the showroom. Maggie Collins had returned unannounced. She stood near the Azure once more, her calm presence blending seamlessly with the new atmosphere. Julian joined her, slipping an arm around her shoulders. Without interrupting, they observed how judgment had been replaced by curiosity, how suspicion had given way to opportunity. When the demo ended, the boy hopped out of the cockpit, breathless with excitement. Blake greeted him with a high five and said, "That's how all great stories begin." The boy nodded, clutching the simulator's steering wheel as if it were a trophy. Maggie and Julian approached, smiling. Maggie rested a hand on Blake's shoulder. "Thank you for listening," she said softly. Blake blinked and nodded, his voice catching. "Thank you for teaching." As the Collinses turned to leave, Maggie paused by the reception desk. A new young woman in simple attire stepped forward, looking uncertain. Maggie caught her eye and offered a warm smile. The woman's face brightened. Outside, a light drizzle began to fall, turning the city lights into shimmering reflections. Maggie slipped her hand into Julian's, and they walked toward their waiting Phantom. Before climbing in, Maggie looked back at the showroom one last time. The open doors seemed to welcome the next story, one yet unwritten, full of possibility. Inside Boston Luxury Motors, the lesson held firm. Treat every person as if they were the most important guest in the room. After all, change doesn't roar in, it arrives quietly in respect, and then it resonates forever.